I don't know that I noticed anything any different because I grew up in Seattle, other than it was very, very large and I was very, very shy. And I mean, I was afraid to go into the hub by myself. So I just went early and learned where my classes were and went to my classes. And fortunately, a good friend of mine would meet me outside the hub at lunchtime so that I could go in and eat. Otherwise, I would not have had the nerve. You know, if you grew up in the Northwest, it was always predominantly white. I mean, so you got used to not blending in that, you know, I'm clearly not Scandinavian, which seemed to be the, you know, I think, you know, you hear all the Ballard jokes, but it seems like there are quite a few people from that part of the world here. Certainly it seemed mostly white, and then next would be Asians. My sense is that population-wise, there were probably fewer blacks than probably Asians or, well, certainly Caucasian people, and then maybe fewer Hispanics, or actually I think you should say Latinos, and then Indians, at least in terms of what you saw. And you know, when I first went to the U, I was not into being black. I mean, I felt a lot of the riots in Watts I thought were embarrassing, and that it reflected very poorly on us, which I think is the function of how you feel if you're not necessarily brainwashed, but just if you buy into the dominant culture's attitudes towards you. And then my parents were fairly conservative, and you know, you didn't do anything that would impact negatively on your family or look inappropriate or wear loud colors, anything stereotypical. So in that sense, you know, I wouldn't say I was like an Uncle Tom, but I didn't understand that rage or that frustration, and I was embarrassed by it.
So at some point a change happened.
Larry Gossett. My brother and I think my brother would drive and we would go to school together, and Larry would work on me. Now this is my sophomore year, and every day he would talk about things, and I would, and in a lot of ways it still is, that it's really hubris to take pride in race or things that you really have absolutely nothing to do with. It's a form of false arrogance, and it seems to me you should just be who you are, which was, I think, a way of not really acknowledging the kinds of issues that we faced. And blacks, African Americans, can be really good. I think we're very skilled at making white people feel comfortable around us. At least those of us that are successful, or most successful, are those most capable of making whites feel comfortable. So you can't really blend in, but, you know, I speak, I think, relatively proper English. I don't use X's when I ask for things in that sense. And I'm not sure that I wasn't very arrogant and didn't look down on my own folks, partly just because of the message you got in this country. So it was Larry who very gently, without judgment or ever being harsh, just worked on me every single day. And then all of a sudden, little things he would say you start to notice. And I'm not sure, but sometime during my sophomore year, it's almost like I had an epiphany and embraced being black. And I'm not sure I would have before. I'm sure I didn't before. You know, you can't deny what you are, but you don't have to like it. I mean, I know growing up, I actually thought it was a punishment. I did. I mean, I was already insecure and all those things. So it was like, and of course you'd be black. I mean, of course God would make you black because you're all these other negative things. That I put on whoever it is that has to do with creating the images people have of themselves. I mean, they didn't make me insecure, but clearly the images of black people weren't, well, you didn't see us except in criminal settings for the most part, or subservient settings. A lot of that changed. I had certainly gotten into being black, and they would have these meetings, and so I would go. and listen. And it would be people, more EJ and Larry and Carl Miller than my brother. I mean, the first time I went there, my brother was the president of the BSU. I don't know how much time he had to spend because he was also in medical school, and in terms of priorities, I'm sure that had to outrank having a BSU meeting. Though even my brother could get upset, but I think part of it was just how we were raised, that I don't know that I felt initially the same anger and sense of not being included, because certainly in high school I'd say I was a popular student. I was a student body officer. There weren't very many of us there, and I think one of the reasons I think that black people here have been able to really have lives is because there weren't enough of us to be threatening to anybody. So you actually had a shot at pretty much doing whatever you wanted, within reason. But going to college and being encouraged to do that, I got that as a little kid. The whole civil rights movement, as well as the Vietnam War activity, you definitely felt that we were in the right. I think part of our problem, though, was that we focused on making a moral point. I think most people who were not total idiots knew that things weren't fair. And this isn't something I originally thought, but this fellow who used to come and work with the BSU named Jimmy Garrett, on whom I had a tremendous crush, that was one of the things that he said was the problem with that movement, was it really focused on making a moral point as opposed to really winning the war. Morally, I think, of course, we were in the right. I mean, most people now, we're fighting and causing a lot of Iraqi people to be killed over a moral point. And it's hard to explain. I just think that a lot of people did know. A lot of it is about power and being willing to share it and being willing to, I guess, open the door a little wider and let someone else come to the table. And it can be scary. It can be very scary. I say that just probably because I've reached a certain age and I look at younger people who sometimes think differently, and that can be a little threatening and a little challenging. So I admire those people who I think worked and changed. People kind of that we would think were on the other side who eventually saw the light.
Tell me about President Odegaard.
I really liked him. I think he was a decent, honorable man. I think I mentioned to you earlier that I'm not even sure we really needed to sit in. I think the university was already moving in that direction and probably would have gotten there anyway. Though I remember talking to Carl Miller about it, and he doesn't agree. He really thinks we needed to do it. There was kind of a battle of wills. But 1968, it was the fashion to have sit-ins. Just as I think in 69 and 70, then there were student strikes. But I think 68 was kind of the year of the sit-in all over the country. But my sense was that Dr. Odegaard was already fairly sympathetic to that and he just didn't seem like old guard, maintain the status quo. I felt that, like a lot of intellectuals, he was kind of open to the changes that were happening. And if you have any kind of conscience, as I suspect he did, those changes were going to happen once it becomes clear. The other person who I think is so unsung is Dr. Evans. And unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but he had a lot to do with starting that first EOP program after the sit-in, and I think had a real strong commitment to that, along with Dr. Odegaard. Yeah. I liked both of them very much. If he were alive, I would apologize for sitting in and taking over his office. I would. I just kind of want him to know that, yeah, I did know that you were going there anyway. I think it had already started when I got there. I knew, we knew it was going to happen any day. It wasn't clear exactly what day. What was funny were the memo wars. because I think we would issue our little proclamations, and pass them out, the pamphlets. And then there would be all these administration people, in their suits outside the hub, help us avoid a crisis, or let's avoid a crisis, handing out their take. But it had gotten so political by that stage, and it was just the time and the atmosphere, and sit-ins were the thing to do. So I remember going there, and I don't even remember what I was wearing, but I think I was wearing pearls, something. I mean, it was still when you kind of dressed to go to school. And I think we were sitting around Dr. Odegaard's desk, like in a conference room, and I remember he turned bright red, and I think we refused to leave. And at one point, someone even suggested that he wouldn't be allowed to leave, which no one was for that. And he did leave. But 4 professors, I think, yeah, he'd been meeting with some of the faculty senate, and 4 professors, I think it was 4, stayed, or at least 2 did, and just asked if anyone played bridge. And I think it was because they were afraid that we would be hurt if they weren't there. Because I know someone from the drama department came and looked at me and said to get me out of there because the police would hurt me. I think because I looked very square and sedity. I don't know. I just remember being a little nervous because I wasn't sure that my commitment was going to extend to being struck. And you're in a situation where that could happen. And after seeing the films of how civil rights workers had been treated in the South, they really are heroes to me. I mean, because they did risk life and limb, and I was just a little concerned about someone hitting me because I didn't want to be hurt. People that I thought would have come did not, but I think it's because they had done a lot of that in the South. And then high school students came, and SDS people came, and I think I got nervous when some Black Panthers came because they had weapons, and no one was about taking that on. And I think they left. I'm assuming they did. That was the one part that was scary. That, and there was a glass coffee table. I mean, those are the things, and my little need to control my environment, that caused me concern. Just that you could really, really get hurt. And then it just is kind of a blur. We were there. Oh, I do know. Yeah, my good friend Kathy Halley, now Kath, we just kind of tried to agree that we would stick close to each other and get arrested together if that's what it was going to take. That was to make me a little nervous because of my mom. That would not have, we weren't supposed to shame the family name, even for a good cause. Getting arrested is always not a good thing. And I was a chicken. I mean, even now, I just prefer to follow the law and you don't get in trouble. I did feel that it was important to go there and be there. And it wasn't until I saw, I think, police cars that I started being a little apprehensive. And it really dawns on you. Because that was also when they had that one officer who would really beat people up with, I can't remember his name. I think he later killed someone. A few years later, or several years later, and I can't remember his name. And it wasn't just aimed at blacks. I mean, it was just students, any kind of radical student. He was a fairly violent man. Shocking that they would allow him to carry a gun and use it against people. When you're little, how you think the police are your... I'm not sure at what age it became really clear that I could not ever make that assumption. Though you can more because you're a girl. But I'm sure, certainly by the time I was in college, it's because black men would get killed in questionable circumstances, and it's still okay. I mean, the one message I get is that police officers can still kill black men and walk.
Right.
And I just do not believe that every single shooting is justified,
Yeah,
personally.
so many more.
And how come they're always black? I'm not saying they never shoot innocent white people down. But, you know, when you think about that kid in New York, you know, just in his doorway, I mean, riddled with bullets. I don't even understand that kind of excess, but I have always felt, or when I see the officer, my first thought is, this is my protector. That's just not my first thought at all. Even though I think it's so unfair to so many officers who probably aren't even thinking about me. So I recognize that I'm not being entirely fair, and I don't want to just malign them. It was just a really different time. But I really, the one thing I think about my generation, which might also include you, is that we can really feel proud of what we did and what our priorities were, as opposed to, I think, a lot of people who came after us. Because it wasn't about being greedy. It was really about making a change in the world for the better. And certainly opposing the Vietnam War was a sensible thing to do. And there was a real sense of unity among students that I did not find when I went to law school. Whereas, you know, and that was, you know, I started law school in 1977, and it was just such a change from the atmosphere that had been there when I was a student, where there was a sense of camaraderie and we're all in the struggle together. Not at all by law school. Well, I think it was part of the process for change. And it seems like a lot of times it does start with students or some kind of grassroots. And usually the people in the best position to take the kinds of risks that people take to make changes are students, because they usually don't own property, they don't have families that they have to support, and there's a freedom that comes with kind of just it being you. But the thing that I think was disturbing is that for all of the sit-ins and the demonstrating, it seems that the people who benefited, at least initially, were people who had had nothing to do with it. The people who were kind of already on the scene, but those people who really were in the trenches, some have done very well, and I think some have not. And I'm not sure that in terms of black people, I assume that there are more of us that are middle class, more of us go to college, but it also seems like more of us are poor, and more of us are even giving up on traditional society. And I'm not putting down, I don't mean to, kids that get involved in that rap stuff. Okay, I'm aging myself. But that blatant lack of respect for women and any kind of authority was a little troubling. I mean, I understand the rage. And I think that's probably a good sign of how things are, that there is still so much rage. I, of course, put it on the rise of Republicans, beginning with Reagan, because what Reagan seems to have said, and I think continued probably by both Bushes, despite the number of ethnic faces as his administration, is that they were willing to write off a whole generation of black kids that I can't imagine they would do if it had been white kids. I mean, that whole generation of young black kids who don't like themselves, don't care, and have no expectation of even reaching 30 should be troubling to everyone, because we are all responsible for all of the children everywhere, and particularly in your own country. And to just turn your back on that and see kids not going to school, and I don't mean even just blacks, but you see it with Latinos, that kids drop out of school before they even get high school diplomas. And what kind of life, what kinds of choices does that give you? Either if you want money and you don't have talent, then you may well end up breaking the law to make money. And it seems that somehow, with that rise of Reaganomics and the lack of concern for neighborhoods and crazy people or troubled people and ethnic people and poor people, just created an environment where people, because I think a lot of those kids are not stupid and they recognize that nobody values them. I'm not sure how much drugs and other things also play a part, but before kids get to that, something had to have told them that nobody cared about what happened to them. I think. That's my theory. I honestly don't know, not having worked with any.